All right. Well, I am Dr. Jake Porter, and I want to welcome you to this webinar on my model, Couple-Centered Recovery. Um, this is meant to be a big picture roadmap for choosing connection, okay? A big picture roadmap. What I mean by that, well, we're not going to get into just a whole lot of particulars today because we don't have that much time, and hey, you may not even know if you want to. So I'm going to introduce this model to you, and then at the end, if you're wanting wanting to know how to do more, then we'll pick up that subject there. But I'm excited to be with you. I'm excited to share this model. It's changed my life as I've come to understand it. I know it's changed the lives of many hundreds of couples at this point, and I'm really humbled by that. So where are we going to go in this discussion? Basically, I'm going to start out here in just a moment and share with you the story of the model itself. Then we're going to spend some time talking about the philosophical and theoretical orientations of the model. I'm a geek by nature. My hobby is teaching at a graduate school in their counseling program, and so I like to geek out to things like paradigms and philosophies and theories and models. But beyond that, I think it's actually really important. I think that if you can understand the assumptions upon which something is built, you have a better grasp of that thing itself and whether or not it is a good fit for you, whether or not you trust it, believe it, that kind of thing. So I'm going to spend a good deal of time on those philosophical and theoretical orientations. Then very, very quickly, we're going to plug those into the concept of sex addiction or chronic betrayal. And we're going to plug that into the experience of discovering betrayal and betrayal trauma. Then I'm going to give you an overview of the model, all three phases of the model, and then next steps in working the model if that is something that you are interested in doing. All right. So what I'd like to do now is actually share with you the story of the model itself. I am in recovery myself. I'm in recovery for sex addiction, sex and love addiction. SLAA is the 12-step program that I primarily worked. And I've been in recovery now since 2008, I believe. And it changed my life. Being in recovery has changed my life. And so I got into recovery. I got into it hard. I worked hard at recovery. And then in the year 2012, my therapist fired me as a client because she said I ought to be doing this work professionally, and told me to go get trained and then come back to her and see about working with her. And that's what I did. In 2013, I went to CSAT training. I eventually got a master's in clinical mental health counseling and then a doctorate. Underwent CSAT training, APSATS training. Today I get to sit on the board of APSATS. I'm a faculty member with ITAP, which is the credentialing organization for CSAT, certified sex addiction therapists. And I was a pastor before. I used to be a pastor. In 2017, I left pastoring full-time and went full-time into doing this clinical work and started Daring Ventures. So 2013, though, that's when I really started training in this field and doing this work professionally. And I thought my plan was I'm going to work with addicts. I'm going to work with male addicts. Why? Because I get it. I know what to do with them. Like, it was clear to me. I felt confident that I could provide good help there. And so that was my intention. And then lo and behold, it wasn't too long after that someone reached out to me, Kathy Reynolds, who now works with me here at Daring Ventures on my team, who is an APSATS trained partner coach. And she was looking for someone to refer her partners to. And we talked and we began working together. And in the course of working together, my heart softened and I started working with some betrayed partners. And I found it to be incredibly rewarding work, very meaningful work to me. But I said to myself, okay, this is fine. I'll work with addicts. I'll work with betray partners, but I will not do couples work because that just sounds like too much. That seems like way too much work, and I don't understand what to do there. And really not trained as a couple therapist, which I really wasn't. I'd taken like one marriage and family therapy class in my grad program, but my clients started asking me, work with us together, work with us together. So I did. And it didn't take me long to absolutely fall in love with that work. And not just to fall in love with it because it is fun to work with couples, but I found it to be incredibly effective. What I began to experience was that the clients that I saw as a couple, I could move them further, faster than the clients I saw individually. I began to find opportunities to do deeper work with them because of the focus on their primary relationship. And I came from a model, remember, where it was like, hey, you've got your recovery over here and you've got your recovery or your healing process over here. And you each need to do that and you need to get healthy so that you can come together and be healthy as a couple. That's the model that I came from. That's the model I was trained in. And yet then I started having these experiences where it was like, hold on just a minute. Something is happening. Something is happening with these couples as we're putting their relationship at the center of the process. Something beyond what I've been able to see happen when people are working their individual processes and trying to just hold out on the couple's work until they're ready for it, whatever that means. And and that just sparked my inner nerd, my inner academic, and I began doing research and I began getting trained in all sorts of couples modalities. And eventually that led to my doctorate and my doctoral research and just lots and lots of things. And what began to emerge is this model that I call couple-centered recovery. Couple-centered recovery. So that's what you're going to get today, is an overview of this model, couple-centered recovery, that really, like I said, it emerged out of my work with couples and the amazing things that I was seeing happen there. And so we're gonna now move on to talking about the philosophical and theoretical foundations of this model. And how's that for a confusing a confusing graphic? What I'm trying to communicate there are 5 interlocking rings. Okay, there's these 4 on the outside, there's this one right here in the middle. So what these represent are 4 different theories or fields of study. Okay, these theories or fields of study that I draw from. I draw from all 4 of these. There's a lot of overlap between them. There's a lot of synergy between them, but they are 4 independent fields of study. And then right here in the middle is one principle or idea that is the pin that holds them all together in this model. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to walk through these 4 fields of study or 4 theories and the one idea or principle that holds them together. So the 4 fields are adult attachment theory, developmental neurobiology, affect regulation theory, and relational cultural theory. And then that principle that holds them all together is something called values-based self-activation. So we're gonna go through those one by one, and we're gonna start with adult attachment theory. When I was early in my own recovery process, I believe it was before. Yeah, it was. It was before I ever started down the professional road of getting trained clinically. My therapist actually mentioned a book that was an academic book, not necessarily written for lay people, not who are not professionals in the mental health field, but I think it's a great read for anybody. And it's called Addiction as an Attachment Disorder by Philip Flores. Addiction as an Attachment Disorder. I read that book probably around 2010, I would guess. And it was like a lightning bolt struck me, because all of a sudden, something that I intuitively felt in my own experience, something that actually resonated with me from my perspective of faith. I'm a Christian, and that's a very important thing to me. This really resonates, even though it's not a Christian book. I have no idea what Philip Flores's spirituality is, but it just matched both my experience and my worldview and my belief system about humans and relationships and addiction. And so I became a absolute nerd about attachment theory. And so here's the high view of what we're talking about with attachment theory. First of all, is the principle that humans are wired to survive and develop in secure attachment relationships. Secure attachment relationships. Okay. Survive and develop. So in other words, we are created for connection. We now know that literally, the human brain and its optimal development is based in part upon the experience of these secure attachment relationships. So the caregiver to the child, the security felt in that bond, the sense of connection there, it literally stimulates the growth of the brain. Okay, which now we're getting into that overlap with developmental neurobiology, which we'll talk about in a minute. But attachment theory says that connection, that these attachment relationships, they're not secondary needs. See, before John Bowlby, who's the father of attachment theory, before he came along and began articulating these ideas, it was thought that the reason why an infant pair bonds to the mother is because the mother provides food, nourishment. Okay, and so therefore the connection to the mother is secondary based on the primary need for food. Well, basically, through a bunch of research, that's not true. The connection itself, the secure attachment itself, is a primary need. Because of that, here's the second bullet point there. Even the perceived threat to our primary relationships, whether secure or insecure, whether those relationships or experiences secure or insecure, when we perceive them to be threatened, we process that as an issue of primal survival and as being traumatic. So if I walk into my house and I pick up on something in my wife's tone of voice or her facial expression that says we're not okay, I have a spike. Right? I go upward into like a hyper-aroused state. I move toward fight or flight or freeze or flop or fawn or one of those threat responses when I think a relationship is not okay. Okay? It's wired into us. That's why when a kid, like my daughter, 3 years old, she's running around outside, she trips and falls, she's hurt, she immediately calls for mama or daddy, right? Because it's wired into us that the loss of the relationship is a threat, but when there's a threat, the presence of the relationship, so the reverse is true as well, can be a source of comfort and protection. But what happens is these early relational experiences that we have become organized as patterns of relating, serving as templates for how we do relationships. So we all have what is called attachment styles. Attachment styles. And this is a non-conscious sort of template that we are walking around with all through life. And as I interpret what's happening in relationships, I'm interpreting it through the lens of this template, whether it's a secure attachment style, preoccupied, dismissive, fearful, avoidant, disorganized, which we're not going to have time to get into all the particulars of those today. Excuse me, is warming up in my office. But we all have an attachment style. So what that means practically is that when I feel threat, I'm gonna lean more on that template and what I expect to happen in the relationship than my actual attention to what is happening right here, right now in this relationship. And it has the result of me automating my partner and myself. I go into this automatic mode where I'm just following this script of how I think things are going to go. And those are rooted in these early attachment experiences. Sum all that up. What the big headline for the CoupleCentered Recovery model is from attachment theory is that feeling safe and secure in the relationship is a vital need for you and your partner. When we don't feel safe and secure in the relationship, we are going to react one way or another. We are going to be in a state of threat, or we're going to avoid. We're going to do a flight response, which is itself based in a state of threat. Okay, it's just a little more subtle, a little harder to get in touch with. So that's one of the first theories that informs my model. Okay, the second is developmental neurobiology here, if you want to geek out, and I'll put his name here. Alan Shore is a researcher who he's probably my favorite living neurobiological researcher today. That I know that's geeky. My geek's really coming out a lot today, but I'm talking about my favorite thing. So one of my favorite things. So developmental neurobiology is really looking at the development of the brain and the nervous system throughout the body through the lifespan, but particularly in these very formative windows of development, infancy into early childhood. There's also during adolescence a window in which we're particularly open to formation. But here's what's important for us from developmental neurobiology. Early attachment experiences have an effect on the development of our social emotional capacities. So the nervous system of an infant literally is not able to regulate itself. An infant literally cannot self-soothe. So when when a 2-month-old, 3-month-old, 4-month-old baby is left alone to self-soothe, they're not actually self-soothing. They cry and cry and cry until they fall into collapse, okay, which is a whole separate threat response. They're shutting down to prepare to die, okay? These children need an external nervous system to come in and regulate them. And as that external nervous system regulates their nervous system, soothing them, mirroring them, comforting them, it begins to scaffold their own capacity. It builds out their ability to eventually do that regulation work themselves. All right. So now at 3 years old, my daughter, there's a degree of, hey, you can do it. You can take a deep breath. She still may take some coaching and some prompting from me, but she's figuring it out, right? She's not just, it's more than just figuring it out. She's gaining the capacity. So we learn to take care of ourselves and others by being taken care of. And so if in our childhood, we experienced abuse or a lot of neglect, if we didn't have those secure attachment relationships where a caregiver was mirroring us, pouring into us, helping us learn the healthy ways to regulate our emotions, if we didn't get that, we probably don't have that capacity because it has to be downloaded into us from the outside. It's not just going to come from nowhere. Also from developmental neurobiology, implicit memory connects relational experiences and neurophysiological states of functioning. Okay, what does that mean? All right, so we all have this implicit memory system, non-conscious, automatic, very, very fast. It's what we've experienced over and over and over again. Think of it kind of like muscle memory. Muscle memory is a form of implicit memory. Okay, so what happens is our relational experiences, what's happening in the relationship through the implicit memory system is connected to neurophysiological states of functioning. So in other words, neurophysiological states of functioning means what's the state of my body? What's the state of my emotional state, my affective state, what's happening? And then that has an effect on what's happening in my mind, right? And so what's happening out here in the relationship through implicit memory and association and repetition can trigger within me a certain neurophysiological state, which means, here's my, bring it down to earth. We function in relationships based on old scripts. So old ways. I know how this goes. I know how this fight happens, or I know what happens next, but that's usually non-conscious. Okay. It's usually non-conscious. Okay. So I've got a line here. Watch out for 50-cent reactions to nickel problems. When you have a 50-cent reaction to a nickel problem, all right, when you overreact to something, there's probably an implicit memory that's been activated, and it's activating within you this felt state of the body, this neurophysiological state that's then going to result in all sorts of cognitive processing. All right. And there's it's really a trauma response is the bottom line. I just shared the slides again because several of you have come in. You should be able to download those now. And if you can't, when this replay is ready, we'll send you all an email that has access to these slides. And then lastly, from developmental neurobiology, many relationship struggles are rooted in developmental deficits rather than defense mechanisms. It's so important to recognize the difference between a defense mechanism and a deficit. A defense mechanism, I could do this thing, but I don't. I choose not to. It may not be like a conscious active choice, but there's this moving away from it, all right, out of fear or pain, fear, pain or whatever, versus a deficit. A deficit means I don't have the capacity. A very powerful example of this is when I work with addicts who don't have the capacity for shame regulation. And so when they go into shame, they sink down, they collapse, and they're stuck there until it finally plays out. Finally, hours later, maybe a day, maybe days later, they finally come up out of it because they literally don't have the capacity to come out of it in that moment. It wasn't built into them from early on. Okay. So from this, what I believe is that we are better off focusing on growing ability, on expanding capacity, not highlighting inability. I do not like when people think that shame is going to move people out of shame. They shame people for their shame response. What's wrong with you? Can't you see she's just trying to share her heart? What are you, not man enough to hear it? I mean, like if the guy's really already in shame, that ain't going to help. We don't shame people into healing. Just harping on what people can't do, that is not going to help. What I'd rather do is get a couple in these chairs right behind me. And this happens. Like I really do this in those two chairs. Right. And I walk someone right to the edge of their capacity. Let's continue with the example of shame resilience, right to the edge and actually into the experience of shame. And then we do the work to actually scaffold their capacity and build out their capacity to overcome the shame. That is transformative work. That is transformative work. And so there's no shaming here. Someone sent me a question privately that I see. What if you have a nickel reaction to a 50-cent problem? And I've seen people do that. I've seen those addicted partners and betrayed partners both do that. And that is probably a trauma reaction as well, where it's like too threatening to actually have that right size response. You've learned to not have your voice or whatever. And so what are we going to do? We're going to walk you to the edge and we're going to help you expand that capacity. We're going to push you to have the experience that is actually constructive literally in your nervous system, constructive in terms of your own abilities, widening your window of tolerance for what you're able to do and live through. Affect regulation theory. Also, Alan Shore has done a lot of work in affect regulation theory. What we see here is that the human nervous system has a bidirectional effect with other nervous systems at a basic level. In other words, and you've probably all had this experience. You walk into a room, like a big party or a meeting or whatever. You walk into a room with a whole bunch of people and you immediately sense the emotional atmosphere of the room. Maybe you walk in and it's like, hey, this place is happening. The people are happy here. Or you walk in and it's like, stone cold, icy. Ooh, what is going on? Very uncomfortable. Why? Because your nervous system is picking up on what is happening in all these other nervous systems. There's little cues and all this stuff being signaled from one of us to the next. And it's all happening automatically and non-consciously through the mirror neuron system and all these other processes. Okay. And so this is happening in couples as well. And you can't help it. Like, you can't even stop it. Your nervous systems are having a bidirectional effect on one another. How I am feeling in my body, my affective state, is having an effect on you. And your affective state is having an effect on me. And so that's why the whole old school model of, hey, that's your side of the street and you can't make me angry, and that's on you, and no, because reality is, we have to accept reality. Reality is, how I show up will affect you. How you show up will affect me. All right. Secondly, implicit communication between nervous systems supersedes explicit communication. Okay. Explicit communication are the actual words you're saying. The actual words you're saying, okay? Implicit communication is everything else: tone of voice, body posture, distance between me and you, facial expression, all of that. And if they are mismatched, you're going to believe my implicit over my explicit. If my mouth is going one way and my feet are going the other, you will believe my feet every single time. So we have to own that. That's why, when I'm working with couples and in my model, we spend so much time not just focusing on right understanding or right words, but the right delivery. And it's not about faking it. It's not about acting, because when I shift my implicit communication, it shifts me. It does shift me. Okay. This is important because, like it says here on the bottom bullet, psychobiological safety. So knowing and sensing, like deep in our nervous system, feeling safe is required for higher cortical functioning. If I'm in threat mode, my prefrontal cortex is going to be largely offline. Okay. And if it's offline, if my prefrontal cortex isn't fully online, the part of my brain that does self-reflection, appreciation for complexity and nuance, what's the word? Impulse control. I could not think of the word. Impulse control, social and moral reasoning, perspective taking, empathy, all of those functions offline. Okay. If that's offline, how are relationships going to go? Not very well. Not very well. So, in other words, if we're going to do real problem solving, if we're going to do real conflict resolution, safety has to come first. So this is the big takeaway. And this is where a lot of my colleagues disagree with me, and that's fine. They can disagree with me. But these old school ways of doing things where it's like, hey, here's 12 principles for fair fighting, or here's, 10 rules for conflict resolution. I say that doesn't work. It doesn't work. Why? Because when you're feeling unsafe psychobiologically, when your frontal lobe is offline, you don't give a rip about that handout. And even if you did, in that moment, you don't have the capacities to execute it. Okay? So what this means is that what I say is less important than how I say it. And I have to focus on that, and I have to own that for myself. And now if there's conflict between us, we don't see it as we have to resolve this conflict in order to connect. No, we have to connect first in order to resolve the conflict. That is turning the old model on its head. Okay. Now you may be thinking, what? Connect in order to resolve conflict? He's betrayed me. He did, I hear you. Here's my response. I set a very, very low bar for connection. Connection doesn't mean like super close, ready to be super intimate. No, connection means we're not fighting against each other. we're fighting alongside each other for the same thing. Okay. So I may still be unsettled. I may still hurt. I may still have concerns and fears, but I'm not fighting against you. We're fighting together against this problem. We're fighting together against this rift between us. We're fighting together for peace. We're fighting together for our marriage, for our commitment, for our family, for our legacy. And so, okay, this problem is a big problem, but what's bigger than this problem is the legacy we want to leave our family. So we're going to attack this problem together. Now, what that does is now I'm not fighting against you. It lowers, even if just a little bit, lowers the threat level and allows more cortical functioning to come online. That is a completely different way of handling these issues. And that is absolutely critical in my model. And I've had people tell me, I'm not going to do that. And I say, okay, that is your choice. And there are lots of other professionals who will do it the way you want to do it. Conflict resolution before connection. I'm just telling you, I don't think it works neurobiologically. Okay. The fourth domain that I pull from is relational cultural theory. This came out of Wellesley and the Stone Center, I believe. Was it the Stone Center? But Wellesley, back in the 70s, it was a feminist theory at first, and now it's been applied to all sorts of things. But it's a really amazing theory and model of therapy. And what its starting point is that people grow through relationships and toward relationships. So relationships are both the means by which we grow individually. So here the overlap with attachment theory and the developmental neuroscience. So here's another theory, another school of thought speaking to the same thing. We grow through relational experience, but also toward relationships. We're growing for the sake of relationships. I'm growing individually so that I can do relationships better and deeper. All right. So we're created not only for connection, but by connection. And in this theory, maturity is characterized by and comes through mutual authenticity, empathy, and empowerment in relationships. So, and in an ideal relationship, and listen, here's what I want to say. If you're listening and you're a betrayed partner, or you betrayed your partner, and you're looking at the state of your relationship and you hear me say this bullet point and you're like, that sounds like a fantasy world for us, I will validate that. But I don't want you to think about where you are. I want you to think about and dream big. And then just for a moment, allow yourself to hope. I want you to think about what could be. I want you to think about in a perfect world, maybe. All right. In a perfect world, in an ideal relationship, your individual maturity is going to show up in you showing authenticity and empathy and empowerment in your relationships. But also, so your maturity is not just characterized by that, but it comes through it. So as you actually give mutual authenticity, empathy, and empowerment, you mature. So as you mature, you demonstrate these things, but as you demonstrate these things, you mature. So it's like an upward spiral. Okay. And so what that means is, and again, I know this is like an ideal and it may seem so far from what you're experiencing, but listen, we have helped hundreds of couples get there. Okay. With this model, so that both people say, you know what, what's good for the relationship is good for me. There's not a distinction. If it's good for the relationship, it's good for me. If it's good for the relationship, that's for my growth. I grow. And when I grow, that's good for the relationship. The last point from relational cultural theory that is critical to the couples-centered recovery model is that the ability to navigate relational complexities is a sign of forward psychological development. So the idea, okay, I need to go, heal and grow out here so that I can show up and do this relationship better. This theory says the way that you heal and develop and mature and grow and transform is by showing up in this relationship differently and better. All right. Because, and even in the old models, the people who go, oh, okay, I can't work on my marriage right now because I got to go work on myself. You know what they're going to go do? Get in relationships with a therapist or a coach or a men's group. You know, they're going to go and they're going to be in relationships, and those relationships are going to have a transforming effect on them. Why do it in those relationships that you're with these people 1 hour, 2 hours a week, 3 hours a week, 4 hours a week, instead of the one where you're with them like, I don't even know, 40, 50 hours a week, right? So much more opportunity for growth. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If I keep at this rate, we're not going to get through all this material. All right. So summing up from relational cultural theory, you never have to choose between what's best for you and what's best for your relationship, because what's best for your relationship defines what's best for you. And I've had all kind of people go, whoa, 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 whoa. I tried that for years. Look at what it got me. Betrayed. Yes. That doesn't mean you were wrong. It means the other person was wrong for not also abiding by that paradigm. And I would never ask someone who lived by that paradigm and got burned by it to just dive in head first, blind, trusting that all of a sudden this person's going to do it. No, what's going to happen? That person who betrayed you, they have to go first, because this principle is only safe and it only works if both people are committed to it. And so what that means is, since you were committed to it for so long and he wasn't, now he or she, you know, the one who betrayed is going to have to demonstrate their commitment to this principle while you watch and see, and they prove that they're trustworthy for you to then eventually enter back into that paradigm with them. So now lastly on this introductory philosophical and theoretical portion is this concept or this principle of values-based self-activation. So what this is getting at is that we move ourselves in the direction of our own development with every choice we make. The lie that addicts tell themselves that, oh, one more time won't matter. Oh, it doesn't matter. What's just one more time, or that kind of a thing. It's such a lie. It's so dangerous, because every single choice I make moves me along a particular developmental trajectory. And I mean, this is even literally in your brain, because neurons that fire together wire together. Maybe you've heard that expression before. Neurons that fire together wire together. What does that mean? Well, that means that every time I do something, I am more likely to do it again. I am more likely to do it again, unless there's this immediate traumatic reaction to it, and then my brain's like, never do that again. But that is a very, very, very small percentage of choices we make that lead to that, which is why every time I make a choice, that choice sets up my future choices. That choice determines what my next set of choices are, and that moves me along a developmental trajectory. So I have to take my choices seriously. All right? I have to take my choices seriously. Secondly, we're responsible for acting in congruence with our values. Integrity is a choice. I define integrity as the state of being in congruence with my values. If my values are courage, kindness, humility, and joy, when I am not acting in accordance with those values, that is my responsibility. Okay? And it is my choice whether I do it or not. So I have a big emotion come up, huge fear, huge threat, huge resentment, huge victim mentality. A lot of addicts struggle with that. Okay. And I have this feeling, and it's yelling in my ear. And what normally happens is that it's like that drives the bus. What I'm saying is, no, there it is. It's there, but I'm going to feel the feeling, but I'm going to act on my values, because I'm responsible for my choice. I'm not ignoring it. It's one point of data, and my emotions all tell me something important, but that's just one point of data. All right. even with that point of data, I'm still going to act in accordance with my values, which doesn't always mean contrary to my emotions. For example, anger has a purpose. Anger helps me protect. All right. Maybe I'm angry at this discovery, but in my anger, I'm going to also act within my values, or try to. That's where we want to get. Trauma takes a toll here. I know that. I've got whole webinars on that and whole talks about that, but I'm talking about where we want to go. I'm talking about the final destination and how we're going to get there. So acting on our values serves the individual, it serves the partner and the relationship. So once again, we don't have to choose between these. So synthesizing all of these together, both sex addiction and the discovery of betrayal are rooted in attachment-oriented traumas. Okay. Early attachment traumas result in developmental deficits, and developmental deficits and adult attachment traumas result in affect dysregulation. So in other words, so what I'm saying is in this theory, whether there's addiction or betrayal, most of the time, because I'm never going to say all the time, most of the time, both of those are rooted in attachment-oriented traumas. Those traumas cause affect dysregulation. Affect dysregulation causes problems in the relationship. Okay. And that all has to be healed, the whole thing. All right. Not just the attachment rupture itself of the betrayal, not just the wound of the betrayal, but now everything that's happening in the system and in the relational dynamic between them as well. And the roots of it, the actual traumas at the roots of all of this. Okay. All of that. How is that going to happen? Through moving toward, over time, because it's not going to happen right away, experience of authenticity, empathy, and empowerment, bringing healing to both parties individually and together. And it's the commitment to principles and values that is going to direct their development, both individually and the development of the relationship to that desired end. So we've got to have a vision for where we want to go first. We've got to have that vision of where we want to go first. Okay. All right. So, conclusion of this section. What are we trying to do in couple-centered recovery? Well, we are trying to leverage the biologically wired in attachment system for the healing of both individuals in their relationship by placing the most important attachment in the client's lives at the center of the recovery process. All right. So instead of sidelining the relationship, sidelining the marriage, sidelining your primary partner, you're saying my recovery is going to be walked out first here with my partner. Okay. That's radical. That is radical. That got me a lot of opposition from others in my field, but thankfully many people are coming along now, and now I'm getting some the tides are turning right now that I'm faculty with ITAP, and people are listening, which is a great thing. So here's just looking at sex addiction and how I conceive of it being trauma-based. So we're going to start at the top where it says acting out. That's what you see. It's the acting out behaviors, whatever they are, pornography or prostitution or chronic affairs or whatever that actual behavioral acting out is. But underneath that, what's fueling that is this preoccupation. Preoccupation doesn't mean just thinking about acting out all the time, though that is one form of preoccupation. Preoccupation is this cognitive state of that is serving a function. And that function is that these thoughts are helping cover my affect dysregulation. So there's something else going on in my body. In the old classic addiction cycle, this is shame or despair. But it's not limited to those. So if I can't tolerate intense emotions, I can't tolerate painful emotions, I've got unresolved shame, unresolved grief, unresolved pains, unresolved fears. And I don't know how to deal with those in healthy ways. I can't regulate my emotions and my body state in those healthy ways. I turn to preoccupation, which is going to distract me and pull me out of that, but that eventually will lead to acting out. Now, that's the old addiction cycle, right? It's this the blue arrow that goes from acting out back down to affect dysregulation. There's that cycle right there. But where does it all come from? Well, underneath that, that's where those developmental deficits are. That's where those early childhood traumas, that's where growing up in a family system that was rigid and disconnected, that's where experiencing neglect, that's where not being mirrored, that's where not having the capacity to self-regulate instilled within you has this effect that then grows into the affect dysregulation, the preoccupation, and the acting out. And how about betrayal trauma? How about, discovering infidelity or discovering betrayal as a traumatic experience? Well, I just quote this. I love this article from 2019, a very important peer-reviewed, evidence-based article, a legit research study. Basically, I'll read the quote and then I'll explain it. The integration of the findings discussed herein suggests that infidelity-based attachment trauma manifestations may resemble disorganized attachment behavior. What does that mean? Well, disorganized attachment behavior is a particular type of attachment style. It's a come here, go away, a push pull. I hate you, don't leave me. You hurt me, but you're also the one I want to comfort me. But I don't want you too close because I'm threatened by that. But if you get too far away, I'm threatened by that as well. All right. And to our knowledge, in the history of understanding attachment styles, there's only one way to develop that attachment style, and it is trauma. And what this is saying is that betrayed partners manifest these symptoms. Okay. And even if they didn't before, even if before they appeared securely attached, after the discovery of the trauma, the betrayal, they have these disorganized attachment behaviors. That is what happens when the person who is and is meant to be the source of security and comfort simultaneously becomes the source of threat and distress. One person, both things. Come here, go away, push, pull. I hate you, don't leave me. I want you, don't get close, right? What does that mean? Well, and this is just like, I don't even argue about this, okay, anymore. Betrayed partners are neither the cause nor the cure of their partner's sex addiction, and being betrayed is not evidence of codependence. It is not evidence of borderline personality disorder. Betrayal is traumatic. The discovery of betrayal is traumatic. All right. Nobody develops borderline personality disorder at 45 years old. All right. So it just drives me crazy when there's this treatment-induced trauma of these professionals who are labeling these people, and it's usually women who are vacillating and going back and forth, and they're having all these strong reactions, and those are disorganized attachment manifestations, and they're labeling them as being borderline or codependent. No, that is a trauma response. That is a trauma response. Now, can a betrayed partner have, for example, borderline personality disorder? Absolutely. I've met some of them. I've worked with some of them, but I'm not going to diagnose that until we know that that's what's going on and it's not merely symptoms of the betrayal trauma. Okay. So getting into the model itself now. With CoupleCentered Recovery, which is relationship-centered and trauma-informed, there are 5 goals. I call them sort of like top line goals. These 5 goals, and these 5 goals are situated within 3 phases. So the 5 goals are assessment, stabilization, meaning making, and grief, addressing the relational dynamics, and renewal of the relationship. The 3 phases: seeking safety and stability, grieving together, and revisioning the relationship. So here is a handout, and I shared the file with you earlier. I will share it again There we go. And if you can't download it right now, don't worry. We'll send you an email with a replay once it's been edited and it's ready. And you will share the file there as well. But here it is, a PDF, because I know that these words might be pretty tiny for you on your screen right now. But this is the overview of the whole model. Just to orient you here, we've got the addict's recovery at the top and the partner's recovery at the bottom. That's based on the work of Patrick Carnes and Stephanie Carnes and the work that they have done for decades. And then right here in the middle, that's my couple-centered recovery model. And so what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to show the context, the couple's context of the individual, the context together of how the couple could move through, or they could move through together. And what I want to point out is, notice the top in the addict's recovery spot, there's these time frames. All right, there are these time frames, of how long you're in these various stages. And you add all that up, and many of you have probably heard this before. Oh, it's a 3 to 5 year process. Healing from betrayal, healing from sex addiction and getting your relationship back is a 3 to 5 year process. Well, okay. And yeah, that's accurate in the old model, 3 to 5 years. And I don't have evidence for this yet, but we are working on actual research to back this up. But I can tell you that anecdotally, the couples who enter this process in this model, couple-centered recovery, they're getting all the way to the end of this timeline in half the time, 1.5 to 2.5 years, not 3 to 5 years. And again, I think it's because they're not doing the individual work and then trying to come together. They're actually, is it more intense? Yes. Is it more threatening? Absolutely. It's more costly in terms of like effort and vulnerability, 100%. And they seem to move through the process faster. So we're going to walk through this now. The first phase is seeking safety and stability. And so there are two of those top line goals, assessment and stabilization, that happen within this first phase. Now, here's what I need to explain about these top line goals, assessment and stabilization. It's not like you do all the assessment first and only then can you move to stabilization. With all of these goals that are within these different phases, you do them both at once. So in phase one, you're doing assessment and stabilization together. All right. And there's no order to the bullet points either. All right. We're just doing what we can do and what's needed. We're kind of triaging here. But without safety and safety, healing won't happen. If you jump to the healing without doing safety and stabilization, you are wasting your time. All right. Wasting your time. We'll talk more about that when we get into phase two. So what are we talking about with assessment? Well, screening. Is this really sex addiction or not? Because sometimes people cheat or people, lie about pornography or whatever it is, and they're not actually sex addicts. That's going to affect the treatment. We're going to learn regulation skills. Okay. And we're going to assess for the current level of regulation skill and capacity. Assessment, we're going to determine what is the appropriate level of care. Level of care means, what does this person need? Do they need inpatient treatment? Do they need 3 times a week individual work? Do they need an IOP program, intensive outpatient program? Is weekly individual and one group a week enough? What level of care do they need? We're going to give an outline for the process. That's kind of what I'm doing with you right now. We're just walking through, because I want to orient people to where they are and where they're going. And so one of the first things that I do with couples is I pull out this handout and I go over it and I help them find themselves, because there's something incredibly orienting about that. When you're oriented and you know where you are and where you're headed, that can be very grounding. And the highest levels of support early on, lots of support. Okay. And what are we talking about in terms of stabilization? We're going to normalize post-traumatic stress symptoms. All right. Post-traumatic stress, the triggers, right? The thoughts, the questions, all of that. It's normal. It is not abnormal. Are we going to give some tools for trying to regulate that and ground those moments? Yeah. And we're going to normalize it because it does happen. It does happen. Lots of education about safety and boundaries. Boundaries is an ongoing learning process, but we're going to start here. You know, what are the boundaries that you need to have in place to be safe? How do you respond to your betrayed partner's boundaries in a way that communicates safety and makes them effective, right? So that it brings stabilization for both of you. We're going to start right away with the one who did the betraying, whether this person is addicted or not. We're going to start right away with empathy skill building. We're going to find out where they are with empathy, and we're going to work with them to expand empathy, because that empathy needs to be on board before they can move into phase 2, at least somewhat on board, not perfect, but needs to begin some capacity for empathy before phase 2 is able to get any traction. And then lastly here, disclosure prep. Disclosure, which we're going to talk about more on the next slide. Disclosure is the first goal that I set. It's like, that's the first place we're trying to get, is disclosure. Okay. And so right away, as soon as possible, we're going to begin preparing both individuals for a disclosure process. So let's talk about disclosure. So in the couple-centered recovery model, disclosure is really conceived of as a threshold. See how it's kind of set apart unto itself on the handout there. It's a threshold that if it works, okay, if it goes as we want it to, what it should do is begin to transition the couple from phase 1 into phase 2. Does that mean there's perfect safety and stabilization after disclosure? No. But the foundations for it hopefully are there, so that we can transition into the next phase of grief, which we'll talk about in a minute. So giving the data of the disclosure, because some people ask, why do disclosure? Why do we need to do that? Well, giving the data of the disclosure allows the brain to transition from threat-driven seeking. Okay, do I know? Is that all? But what else are you withholding? But what about this and that? And wait, dig here. I've got to look there. Oh, I've never checked this, right? Threat-driven seeking to meaning-making grief. Okay, that's the transition we're looking for, from threat-driven seeking, but you're aware, but how, to meaning-making grief. How could you? Why? Oh, the deeper pain and loss. It is good. Disclosure is good for both the betrayer and the betrayed, as the therapeutic preparation process allows for self-awareness and confidence. So it is good for both. And I will throw in there, I believe, and in this model, we would say it is a matter of justice. If you have gaslit your partner, if you have withheld their reality, they have the right to know it. They have the right to know it. But even beyond just having the right to know it, they have the need to know some of it if they're going to stay in a relationship with you. Enough of it that they know you are no longer withholding anything else. Is it possible to remember every single detail of 40 years of acting out? Probably not. I'm not talking about perfection. Okay. I'm talking about commitment, demonstrating commitment to rigorous honesty. And that is what this disclosure process is aiming at. One of the things that it's aiming for. So if disclosure goes well, what does that mean? It's giving the data to the betrayed partner so that that timeline can begin to be more complete. The files can be put more in order. Okay. And now we can go from what happened, to what does it mean that this happened? Grief is where the healing happens. Grief is where the healing happens. Grief is a hard process, very hard, painful, but grief is a healing process. Grief is essentially a process of meaning making. So just to give you an example, as I'm doing this live, we're coming upon the holidays. Okay. we're in the midst of the holidays, the holiday season. And this is going to be the second holiday season without my grandmother. Okay. And I was very, very close to my grandmother. My family's very close, and she was an integral part of the holidays, right? Like I couldn't imagine Thanksgiving and Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. There are traditions there. And so what it meant to me in my assumptive reality of the world as it's supposed to be, what it meant to celebrate the holidays involved at an essential level my grandmother. So when we lost her last year, it was like, how do we do this? Do we even want to do this? But of course we did, and we got through it, and we're like, okay, well, this is what it means to do the holidays without her. And there are still joyful moments, and there are really sad moments. And now as we're moving through it again, there's joyful moments and there's sad moments, and we're learning even more. What does this mean that she's not here? So that is what grief is. Apply that to situations of betrayal, discovery of betrayal. What has been lost? What was lost was your shared story of what you both knew, the story you thought you both had, the history you thought you shared of your relationship, which doesn't mean it was perfect, right? But it was shared. It was your story together. When the betrayal is discovered, that story is shattered, okay? And now a new story has to be made of what happened and what does it mean that this happened? What does it mean that you would do this to me, that I didn't know this was happening? What does this mean about us? What does this mean about God, that he would allow this to happen? Whatever it is, all of these questions, and you're going to answer those questions one way or another. When I was developing this model, I noticed that there were these couples where the betraying partner got sober and into recovery and was doing really well, and the betrayed partner was getting stability from trauma triggers and really experiencing some healing, and even post-traumatic growth was happening, and they still ended up split. I was like, what is happening? Well, I did some research, I dug into it, and what was happening was these couples were not grieving together. So as the dust settled on the destruction of their old story, their meaning making happened separately. Okay, they didn't come back together to create a new, what's called collaborative narrative, a new shared story of us. And if you don't have a shared understanding of the past, it will be very, very hard to have a shared trajectory for the future. All right. So, what is involved in this meaning making process? An impact letter. I've got in CoupleCentered Recovery, there's a very particular format we use for that. I pulled things from EFT, which is an attachment-based, evidence-based couples therapy model, and from PACT, psychobiological approach to couples therapy. I brought these things together with my training in sex addiction and betrayal trauma and all that to create a very particular impact letter process that helps the betrayed partner really get grounded, eyes wide open, on the impact of the betrayal at the level of attachment. So the impact on the betrayed partner, but also on the relationship, because those are related, through the lens of that attachment, not seen, not heard, not chosen, not cherished, abandoned, those sorts of things, which again, it's a hard process, but incredibly empowering to be able to talk and articulate these things. And then an amends process, a restitution letter, which is further empathy building, as the one who did the betrayal is asked to look through the partner's eyes at that impact. And it's a beautiful process. People every week share those letters in these chairs with me. And eventually, rebuilding trust through, not just through sobriety, not just through transparency, but rebuilding trust through the exchange of emotions. I can take her pain, I can sit with it with her, and I can hand it back, not throw it back, I can hand it back, meaning reflect it back, share it with her. And that process of attunement is incredibly healing at the level of the nervous system. That's all rooted in interpersonal neurobiology. That's a part of the model that we do. And then that collaborative narrative. How do you rebuild a shared story? And there's a whole process that I created for that, teaching couples how to talk through piece by piece of the timeline, not every moment of their entire history, because that might be unreasonable if they've been together 40 or 50 years, and we have couples that have been together that long. But those keystone moments, those particularly significant moments, talking through those in a way to rebuild a shared story. That is where the real healing happens, individually and together. Individually and together. Now, here's this green box of addressing dynamics. And I mentioned to you that we do these things at the same time. While we're doing the meaning making work, we begin this formal addressing of the relational dynamic, okay, in the coupleship. Here's why. Imagine if you've got a wound, like let's say I had a terrible cut on my hand, just a really bad cut across my hand. I could treat that wound. I could put salve on that wound. I can bandage that wound. But if I go home and I play basketball with, the kid across the street, and I'm outside roughhousing with my daughter, and I'm cleaning out our gutters, and I'm, lifting weight, whatever I'm doing, what's going to happen? It's going to open the cut. Because even though I treated the cut directly, okay, well, what I haven't done is then allowed that cut to heal in a context that is conducive to healing. See, what happens for couples is they try to talk about the big wound of the betrayal, but then there are all these other things that happen in their relationship, these little moments of rupture that end up having an exacerbated effect, an exaggerated consequence because of the big wound. So we have to work with the relational dynamic to make it one that is conducive to the healing of the big wound. So while we're doing the grief work, the meaning making work, we have to get that relational dynamic to be one that supports the healing of the big wound. Now, note, I've got this little note down here. Note that this actually begins in phase 1 and goes through phase 3. So there's a thread of this work that happens throughout. So all throughout, if I see a dysfunctional pattern or behavior, I'm going to call it out. We're going to expose it. All throughout, if I see disempowering dynamics, I'm going to call it out. All throughout, I'm going to call people to act on their values. Okay, that's going to happen throughout. But there's a particular focus on changing the relational dynamic that has to happen during phase 2. We're going to begin, exposing, I just said those top 3, which happen throughout, but family of origin impact. Now this, I'm not going to do too early on. We're not, if I've got a betrayed partner here, still just bleeding over her husband's betrayal, I'm not going to ask her about her father. Okay. That if it comes up, that's different, but I'm not going to go there. We're going to treat the trauma in front of me. But at some level, beginning to understand the old relational script, especially for the addicted partner or the betraying partner, those old scripts that often come from childhood are essential to then changing how I show up in the relationship. Exposing those defense mechanisms, minimizing, black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, projection, all the different defense mechanisms. Expanding capacity. So here I'm talking about that shame resilience, or here I'm talking about a capacity for empathy. Here I'm talking about capacity for self-compassion, which is huge. I can't have compassion for someone else if I can't have compassion for myself, not in a way that's actually going to lead to relational healing. Appealing to principles. So beginning to actually act on these sorts of principles, like the relationship comes first. We tell each other everything. I never have to choose between what's best for the relationship and what's best for me, because what's best for the relationship is what's best for me. So calling people to act on those principles. And then something called management of thirds, which is basically nothing's going to split this dyad. Nothing's going to pop this couple bubble. Nothing's going to come between us. We're going to learn how to manage the thirds that are out there. And guess what? Everything outside the dyad is a third. Kids are a third. Porn is a third. Church is a third. Recovery meetings are a third. Therapy is a third. Golf is a third. Money is a third. Everything else is a third. We have to learn to manage the thirds so that they are for the good of the relationship, or they get expelled from our orbit, but they never come between us. That was a lot, but that's the work we do. And we start that work in phase 2 to create that environment conducive to healing. But notice how this green box, it swings over into phase 3. So as you're doing and focusing more on this work of changing and transforming the relational dynamic, what happens then is that you actually turn to and find yourself moving into phase 3. But before we get there, I came up with a few assessment questions. Why does it say, are you in phase 1 or phase 2? And I don't have, are you in phase 3? Well, if you're hearing all of this and you're like, this makes sense to me because I've experienced it, I've been there, done that. Check, Jake. Well, catch up to where I am. Well, you're in phase 3. Congratulations. If not, if this stuff is speaking to you, then you're in one of these 2 phases. So here are 3 questions to help you determine which phase you're in. First, trauma triggers or grief waves. So for the betrayed partner, if you are having, you could have both, okay? You could experience both, but I'm asking you, which do you have more of? Trauma triggers are up here, hypervigilance, on alert. I'm focused out here on the threat. I want to find the threat. Very outward focused, intense, okay, out here. Trauma trigger versus grief wave. In here, deeper, intense, pain, loss, anger maybe, but it's more in here. It's in my body rather than out here, if that makes sense. As you get more and more safety and stability, the amount of trauma triggers are going to go down and the amount of grief waves are going to go up. Okay. So that's one way that I help assess betrayed partners for where they are. You can be in grief and still have a trigger happen. Okay. You can be in phase 1 needing safety and stability and have moments of grief, but by and large, where are you? Okay. Number 2, opening wounds or creating connections. So when you talk about what happened, when you talk about the past, does it bring healing? Or did these talks about the past just create new wounds, new ruptures that need repair? If you're not having healing talks that actually lead to healing, mutual understanding, empathy, building trust, if you're not having that, you're probably in phase 1 or early in phase 2 and needing some help to get traction there. All right. And then the third assessment question, protection from or for the relationship. Is the betraying partner or the addicted partner demonstrating the dyadic paradigm of protecting self by protecting the relationship, not protecting self from the relationship? Okay, is there that intentional change in that mindset? Am I adopting that paradigm that I'm going to put the relationship first? When I protect this relationship, that is what's best for me. If not, still in phase 1. All right. If that is happening, then you could be in phase 2 or the beginning stages of phase 2. All right. Okay. Very, very quickly talk about phase 3, because like I said, you probably didn't sign up for this webinar if you were already there. So in phase 3, this is renewal, revisioning the relationship. Here, we're going to basically what this is the fun stage, because it's like, what do we want this relationship to be? Now let's go make it that on purpose. What are our goals? We're going to redesign the dynamics in this relationship, the roles in this relationship. We're going to continue to monitor the rebuilding of trust. And couples therapy is going to start looking a lot more traditional. We're going to be talking about issues other than the betrayal. Okay. So that's what's happening there at the tail end. Okay. So I want to go over this and then we might have time. I know there are tons of questions that have come in. Y'all, there's 600 people, over 600 people registered. We've got over 200 people live. I'm not going to be able to get to all of your questions. I'm really sorry, but maybe I'll be able to get to at least some of them. Okay. But first I want to just give you okay, you heard this. Now what? if you want more, and I try to give a wide range of ideas of options here for involvement in this model. All right. So first is webinars. I do a webinar every single month. Okay. I do a webinar every month on a subject that is pertinent to this model. And so you can jump into those, right? If you go to, in fact, I'll just type it in here, go.daringventuresathome.com, go.daringventuresathome.com, copy and paste that into your browser. If you'll do that, it'll bring up, at the top, there's a library, there's an a la carte option, and you can go through, you can see all of the webinars I've done, and you can get access to those if they're paid. Some of them, there are some free ones in there too. But there's that if you're interested in that. But also, now that you sign up for this, you're on my email list unless you unsubscribe or mark me as spam. Do that and I'll never be able to send you an email again. But you do that, and you'll be notified when I have webinars coming up. So another thing you can do is we've got individual work, group work, we've got therapists, we've got coaches, that all work from this model, that are informed by this model. I put the link on this slide for group work, daringventures.com/groups, but you can go to daringventures.com to get information on individual help as well. So there's lots of opportunities there, and lots and lots of groups. There's a men's sobriety boot camp. So for guys who are having trouble getting sober, there's men's relational recovery groups. So these are focused on guys learning these relational skills, the relational recovery dynamics, empathy building and compassion and those sorts of things, learning how to find your values and act on them, all of that. We do intensives, and our intensives are customized. Our couples intensives are customized. We also can customize individual intensives for people. We do disclosure intensives. We do grief work intensives. We do relational dynamics intensives, and we do intensives that combine all of those. It really depends on the need of that couple. It's a very intense intake process. A lot of people don't make it through because I believe in assessment, and I want to design the intensive that is right for you. If you want to know more about our intensives, there's the website there, daringventures.com/intensives. There's actually a free webinar there that I did on our intensives. So it goes through the whole intensive process and everything about our intensives and the types of intensives and what the intake process looks like, all of that. So lots of intensives, lots. Another intensive that I have coming up, and I'm going to put the link in the chat. I should have typed this ahead of time. So I've got this coming up this year, 2 offerings for men and 2 offerings for women. These are Brene Brown. Based on her work. So the Daring Way, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, and only 8 people can participate in those. For 2024, 8 people for each offering. So there's a website if you're interested in that. I'm putting that there because it's not on the regular intensive page right now. So individual and couple coaching and therapy. So if you're in the state of Texas, we've got therapists. If you're outside the state of Texas, we have coaches that literally work with people from all over the world. They work with people individually and as couples. And so you can get support in that way. And then this is my actual first time to announce this last thing here. The Choose Connection Academy is not launched yet, but it will launch early in 2024. It's an all new program. It's going to walk couples through this whole model with on-demand resources and this online exclusive, safe, gated community that is a support network, weekly coaching experiences with me, group coaching with me and others on my team. And I've been working on this for years, and I'm very excited that it's going to be coming soon. And if you go to CoupleCentered.org and scroll down just a little bit, there'll be something that says sign up for the wait list for this program. You can sign up there, and then when we are ready to do the real official announcement and enrollment you'll be notified about that. All right. So that's just some next steps for any of you who are interested in that. Okay. I'm going to try to take a couple of these questions. Again, I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'll take at least a couple. All right. So how old does an infant learn more to self-soothe? 6 months to 8 months? Little later-ish, 10, 12 months. But it's not like, okay, now they can self-soothe. It's in degrees, right? You're scaffolding. You know what scaffolding means? Like, okay, first we need to build out this level. Well, they've got that level now. So now we're going to help them build out this level. Okay, well, they've got that level now. Now we're going to build out this level. So, there's a range. There's not a moment when they suddenly are able to anymore. Let's see. What can an addict do that is progressing in recovery and is sober for 1 year, 8 months, and the spouse is unwilling to enter any form of relationship repair? You can send her a copy of this webinar. You can write her a letter. You can invite her to couple therapy. You can send her to get her own treatment, which actually another thing I wanted to share, we launched the very first of its kind. I just put it in the chat, clinical retreat for betrayed partners. It is incredible. The results we are getting from betrayed partners are absolutely incredible. You could send her to that, and that might help her find safety and stabilization. So those are things you can do. And if she just continues to refuse, after you try for, I don't know, years and years, then maybe she's making the choice to not be in the relationship, So, because remember, if your feet's going one way and your mouth going another, then we believe the feet. Okay. Another question here. How does the addict with ADHD approach recovery? That's a great question. There do need to be some modifications involved. For example, even length of sessions. And when I do an intensive with someone with ADHD, we format it a little bit differently. So it needs to be taken into account. But here's the problem. I can't explain that all right now because that is like its own webinar. Maybe I'll do a whole webinar on it. That's a good idea. When you fluctuate between come here and go away, is that considered being dysregulated? Not necessarily dysregulated, but that shows the what's it called? The disorganized attachment style, which I can be manifesting that without being literally dysregulated. Is polygraph always recommended? I always recommend it. I do. In fact, we will no longer do disclosures without including polygraph. Do they need to be sober to do the disclosure or just actively wanting to get sober and committed to honesty and recovery? Best case scenario is they're sober. They can get at least 4, 6, 8 weeks of sobriety under their belts so that can be validated as well. I am not one of these therapists though that says, it's mandated. And the reason why I don't mandate it is because the partner deserves the truth. So if the partner understands that this person is still working on sobriety, but they're at least going to get their truth validated up to that point, that day, then we'll still move forward. But we're going to work really, really hard to help that person get some sobriety before the disclosure. Is disclosure absolutely necessary in every situation? I'm never going to use an all or nothing, never. But I will say I have worked with hundreds of couples, and I can think of one couple that did not do a disclosure and are doing really well and apparently they didn't need it. So out of hundreds, I can think of one. I feel my partner and me are doing both phase 2 and 3. I have not done an emotional amends for 4 years, and she asked me when. Do it, brother. Do it. All right. In which capacity would you suggest that a PSAP could work with this model? If they are working closely with a clinician and there aren't additional co-occurring disorders on board. So if there are other co-occurring mental health issues, then that person really needs to be with a licensed clinician. If not, then a PSAP could probably do that work. All right, y'all, I've got to go now. Sorry I didn't get to all of your questions, but I really, really appreciate so much you being here. Someone did ask for the link for the Couples Academy, CoupleCentered.org. Just going to pop that in there. That's where you can sign up for the wait list, and we'll blast you with all of the information. Can I show the links to the programs again? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to share again the slides, because all the links are on the slides. Those are being shared, and I will also put up the slides from that point. I am going to have to step away, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this open for a little while, for another couple of minutes before I have to jump onto my next appointment. And that way you can have access to it. Thank you again, everybody. I appreciate you being here so much. Reach out to us if we can help you with anything.